Breaking here and with breaking news about the security breach where the Atlantic magazine's Jeffrey Goldberg was added to a text thread about U.S. military plans to strike Houthi militias in Yemen. Well, the administration officials involved, who are among the highest ranking in the U.S. government, insist no classified information was shared. Moments ago, a follow-up. Goldberg posted a follow-up piece entitled, "Here are the attack plans that Trump's advisors shared on Signal." He writes in part this: the statements by Hegseth, Gabbard, Ratcliffe, and Trump, combined with the assertions made by numerous administration officials that we are lying about the context of the Signal texts, have led us to believe that people should see the texts in order to reach their own conclusions, and then laid out in this latest piece, which broke just now in The Atlantic. Jonathan Lemire, everyone can see the text for themselves.
Yeah, the screenshots of the texts are included in this piece that Jeffrey Goldberg and Shane Harris just posted on The Atlantic's website. We'll go through a little bit of it now. The White House, as you just mentioned, has insisted time and again two things: that nothing in here was classified and that no war plans were included. Well, as Jeffrey and Shane write, take a look for yourself. I'll read a little bit of it here. These are texts from Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, talking about at 11:44 Eastern that day, weather is favorable. Just confirmed with CENTCOM, we are a go for mission launch. 12:15 texts in this chat, F-18's launch. Declares this the first strike package. At 1:45, talks about how the trigger-based strike window begins. Target terrorist is at known location. As here we are here, second strike at 15:36. More to follow. We're currently clean on OPSEC. Of course, Secretary of Defense declares they're clean on OPSEC in a text chain read by the editor of The Atlantic, who was inadvertently added to that group. And we'll note a short time later, we have further updates from Michael Waltz, the National Security Advisor, who talks about how the target has been hit, declaring positive identifications. So these would seem to me, the very definition of attack plans. And I've already talked to a former Pentagon official who says, reading these screenshots hurriedly, of course, everything in here would be classified.
And leading up to that, of course, a lot of debate about it openly on Signal. Joining us now, Editor-in-Chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg. Jeffrey, would you like to talk a little bit more about the decision to release these?
Well, sure. Well, first of all, we didn't do this lightly. And all yesterday, we were asking our contacts across the administration, national security complex, CIA, DNI, et cetera, do you have any, since the president has declared this unclassified, and since the DNI, since the head of the CIA said there's nothing sensitive or nothing classified in these documents, we just want to make sure that you don't have specific objections to this kind of information going out in public. The White House issued us an anodyne statement late last night saying they think that some of this is sensitive and they would rather not have it out there, but there was no objections to specific details. We did redact one piece of information because we felt on our own that we felt it was best to do, and the CIA asked us. But, you know, at a certain point, the administration is saying that there's nothing classified or secret or sensitive in these. So at a certain point, I just felt, you know, let our readers decide for themselves. Read these texts that I got sitting in my car on my phone in a Safeway parking lot 2 hours before the attack launched, and you tell me if this seems like good operational security. You know, and really, I really mean it. Let the readers decide.
Right. And Jonathan Lemire, two issues here. Of course, that Jeffrey was included on this, and there have been accusations made over the airwaves, I believe by Mike Waltz, that there was some sort of foul play on Jeffrey's part. I'd love Jeffrey to respond to that. But also the fact that this was on Signal is a big issue as well.
Yeah, so Jeffrey, let's start there. Sure you've heard, President of the United States called you a sleazebag. Members of his top officials in his administration used similar terminology to describe you and your reporting here. So first, just respond to that, and we'll go from there.
Well, I mean, it's kind of rude. First, they invite me to their Signal chat, and then they call me names. That doesn't seem right. Yeah, and I've seen these. I mean, I get it. Mike Waltz is looking for the real killer. You know, the simple truth of the matter is, on March 11th, Mike Waltz sent me a message request on Signal, and I accepted it. That's the entire story. I mean, there's no daring do here. I entirely passively accepted his request to connect on Signal. I'm not going to comment on my relationship with Mike Waltz. He's been saying unserious and unkind things about me. That's okay. But you know, the story is the story.
Yeah.
March 11th, he reached out. March 13th, I'm added to the Houthi PC small group. March 15th, they announced to the small group before the attack occurs that the attack is occurring and what weapons they're using. And then I began the process of writing up what I thought was a story about a massive security breach at the highest levels of the United States government. That's the story.
Yeah, it is a massive security breach, although I think the one positive here is that readers can decide for themselves. There is
the one positive here, and this is the purpose of journalism, because, you know, it's like we discovered something that the government was doing that was wrong and dangerous. And, you know, they could have responded by saying, yeah, we shouldn't have been on Signal. We won't do it again.
Right.
That would have been an easy way to deal with this.
It would have been a lot easier than the way they're dealing with it now, because they have a lot of different conflicting stories that they're putting out there. Also, I think trying to defame your character to an extent, and I take issue with that. And Jonathan, on top of it, they're using an unsecured commercial app.
Yeah, unsecured commercial app on phones that themselves potentially could be vulnerable. Jeffrey, let's get you to respond, if we could, to in real time. The White House press secretary Karen Leavitt just posted. She took a screenshot of the Atlantic headline, which reads, I will say again for the viewers, here are the attack plans that Trump advisors shared on Signal. She writes this: the Atlantic has conceded these were not, quote, war plans. The entire story was another hoax written by a Trump hater, yada, yada. So, Jeffrey, does this seem like they're parsing the difference between a war plan and an attack plan?
I don't even know what that means. I mean, the plain language in the text is, well, yeah, what are they arguing? That an attack is different than a war? They put operational details of a forthcoming attack on a terrorist organization into Signal, into a Signal chat that included phone numbers that they didn't recognize. I don't even understand what that means. They're talking about attacking and killing terrorists using various weapon systems. So she's just playing some sort of weird semantic game. I don't understand.
So let's talk about those texts a little further. And as you say, you're allowing readers to decide for themselves what they mean. But just walk us through some of the text you saw there from particularly the Secretary of Defense and then later the National Security Advisor about the operation that day in Yemen.
Right. Look, the key thing here is, this is an interesting one you have up on the screen. This is Mike Waltz in a commercial messaging app providing real-time intelligence updates about the consequences of an American attack. Obviously, there's a challenge here for secrecy, because if you know this, the question then arises, how do they know this, and what kind of assets do they have, technical or human assets that would know that? But the core of this chain is the statement, is the long text issued by Pete Hegseth 2 hours before the first bombs fell in Yemen. Everybody can find it on the Atlantic website now, in which he goes hour by hour, sometimes minute by minute, here's what's going to happen. And the thing that really struck me as I'm, again, reading this on my phone in a Safeway parking lot, the thing that really struck me is that he's telling me and others that an attack hasn't even begun yet, but the planes are launching in 31 minutes. You know, like, imagine this text went to someone else. I mean, if that's not secret, classified information about, or the most sensitive kind of government information in the world, I don't know what is. I mean, if Caroline Leavitt is arguing that it's not a war because Congress didn't declare war on Yemen, okay, fine. She wants to play a semantic game. But this is operational details about a forthcoming attack on an enemy that has anti-aircraft capabilities. They've allegedly shot down our drones before. So why you would tell anyone in the world on a messaging app that American pilots are about to fly into a, sorry for the expression, war zone, that's an interesting question.
President Donald Trump is looking to drastically overhaul U.S. elections, issuing a sweeping executive order that includes requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote. It's a mandate that experts say could prevent millions of Americans from voting because under the rules, a birth certificate doesn't count as proof of citizenship. We want to bring in Vote Beat editorial director Jessica Huseman. Jessica, so if a birth certificate doesn't count as citizenship, what exactly does? And is it a document most Americans are going to have?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of the documents that he's requiring don't actually attest to citizenship at all. Real ID does not necessarily associate in some states with citizenship. New Hampshire is having some of those issues right now. And so it's a strange list of documents. It's clearly been written by a group of people who don't know a lot about how elections are administered or how government documents how the government documents citizenship on identification.
Well, I mean, what are the long-term ramifications of this requirement? And could it end up, ironically, doing Republicans a disservice if things like passports count, but, there's confusion about other IDs that people may not have in Republican strongholds?
Yes, I do think that this is going to affect Republicans, and in some parts of the country, it's going to affect Republicans specifically. So we talked to a clerk in Michigan yesterday who is in a rural part of the state, extremely Republican. Her clerk's office is only open part-time. And so there's a limited range of opportunities for people to come and show her documentation in person. So that's going to be a limitation and definitely an impediment in the long run. There's also, just a huge impact on military and overseas citizens for this. And so, and I know Trump considers the military part of really his most important group of supporters. And so it's striking to me that he has not put in a military exception for the late ballot counting, for example. And so I think that might really hurt him, for example, as well. There are states that do not accept ballots after Election Day, but do make an exception for military and overseas voters whose mail can be delayed for a number of reasons that are completely beyond their control. And so it's really striking the way that this was written and the lack of care that went into it, especially in terms of ensuring that his most strident supporters are accommodated within it.
All right, Jessica Huseman, thank you so much.
The exploding security scandal engulfing the Trump administration. It's only 2 days old, if you can believe that. Now, Trump officials are desperately, and I mean desperately, trying to pretend that sharing attack plans on a non-secure app where a journalist happens to be present, that's a key part of this. It's that they shared it on the app and the journalist happened to be present. That's how we know about it. But they're all pretending like this is no big deal. And their answers, I have to say, are leaving a whole lot to be desired and, frankly, just raising more questions.
The White House and the president's national security team doubling down on efforts to shift blame surrounding that Signal chat debacle.
But certainly the topic is of a nature in which you would not want our adversaries to know.
Current and former defense officials tell me these operational details shared in an unclassified setting would be considered a breach in national security.
It confirms our darkest assumptions about mishandling of sensitive military operations.
Now, for 2 days, it's only been 2 days old, Trump and his team have repeatedly denied that any classified information, any problematic information, was really shared in that chat. And so today, The Atlantic released more text, unredacted, that revealed discussions of weapons used, targets, and timing. And I can tell you that is problematic information to be discussing in an unsecure atmosphere and environment. Now, all the information that any national security expert, most would tell you, would that should be considered classified at the time. because they're so specific and they're detailed and they could put people's lives at risk. We're going to show you the text with the actual military actions they're describing, because I think it's important to see them. So Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth wrote, quote, "Team update. Time now, 11:44 Eastern. Weather is favorable. Just confirmed with CENTCOM. We are go for mission launch. 12:15 Eastern. F-18s launch. First strike package." He then goes on to describe more F-18 and drone strikes. Hegseth then continues to update the chat. 14:10 military time, of course. More F-18s launch. Second strike package. 14:15 strike drones on target. This is when the first bombs will definitely drop. 15:36 F-18 second strike starts. Also, first sea-based Tomahawks launched. You can see the missiles launched right there on the screen. And adding, we are currently clean on OPSEC, meaning operational security. Boy, that one doesn't age so well, does it? Now, there you have it. Those are very detailed. That is exactly what was published from The Atlantic. Those are specifics of what was on this group chat. Now, the transcript of the Signal chat released just this morning completely, obviously, undercuts those repeated denials from Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, and others. In releasing the information, which The Atlantic had originally withheld because of the operational details, they cited a clear public interest in disclosing the information. Trump officials were also back on the Hill today, where they got grilled by Democrats, many calling for Hegseth to resign.
It is outrageous, and it is a leadership failure.
I would argue that Secretary Hegseth, if he had the dignity that he needs to have, should be walking his resignation in, because I believe that his probably is heading toward being relieved of his duty based on what I think are significant and illegal leaks.
Nobody is willing to come to us and say this was wrong. This was a breach of security, and we won't do it again.
He needs to resign immediately, and a full investigation needs to be undertaken.
Now, Congressman Jason Crow's answer there, I mean, that sticks with me because nobody's acknowledged wrongdoing here. There are lots of things wrong, but that's a big one of them. Earlier this morning, The Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg, who, of course, was the journalist who was added to the text chain and wrote the piece on Monday, also highlighted the dangers of sharing military plans in an unsecured chat.
Look, imagine this text went to someone else. I mean, if that's not secret, classified information about, or the most sensitive kind of government information in the world, I don't know what is. This is operational details about a forthcoming attack on an enemy that has anti-aircraft capabilities.
Now, Goldberg also wrote today, quote, "If this had been received by someone hostile to American interests or someone merely indiscreet, the consequences for American pilots could have been catastrophic." The Pentagon guidelines, by the way, on what constitutes classified information are actually pretty clear and include disclosure of significant military plans or intelligence operations.
This text message is clearly classified information. Secretary Hegseth has disclosed military plans as well as classified information.
Targets, times, those kinds of things are absolutely classified, and we all know it.
There is no way, having sat on this committee for 9 years, that somebody would come in with that information and give us something that says unclassified. You can walk out of this room with this information and give it to whomever you want. Y'all know that's a lie. It's a lie to the country.
Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Jimmy Gomez, member of the Intel Committee, who was part of today's hearing, and Samantha Vinograd, former Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism, Threat Prevention, and Law Enforcement Policy at the Department of Homeland Security. Both certainly know how classified information should work and how it travels. Congressman, let me start with you. We showed a number of clips from that hearing today. It felt to me from reading the coverage there weren't a lot of questions answered. There's a lot of obfuscation, if you could say. Did you learn anything from the hearing, and what did you think of their answers?
I don't think they didn't answer anything. And second, it just doesn't pass the smell test. I mean, this is something that's so rational. One, they were first denying that they had this conversation until the report came out. Two, they're denying that there was any kind of targeting information, what weapons were used. And then even just yesterday, Tulsi goes on, uses the "I don't recall" defense. You've been on the job 43 days. This happened 10 days ago. You're using Signal not to plan where you guys are going to go for lunch, but to launch an operational military operation using lethal force. This doesn't make sense on any level, and they're straight up lying to the American public about it.
I mean, the I don't recall really doesn't pass the smell test, so just take your words. Sam, one of the explanations they've given, or the kind of strategies they've had here, should I say, is to say no one was hurt, the operation was successful. This just shows us policy discussion and debate and coordination. You've been in these rooms, you've sat in these meetings, you know how this information is supposed to travel. Why is information traveling over a channel like this, putting people at risk?
Classified or sensitive information is meant to be discussed and transmitted on classified channels, not encrypted ones, because information is classified, Jen, based on the perceived harm its unauthorized disclosure could do to U.S. national security. Look at where we are today. The entire world now knows about internal communications among senior national security officials in the United States.
Including the vice president.
Including the vice president, national security advisor. It's not like we have that kind of insight into how Kremlin officials are discussing battle plans or how the People's Republic of China is having policy deliberations. And by having these kind of conversations in insecure ways, you open up these communications to exploitation by bad actors, foreign governments, criminal networks who can use it to gain an advantage on the battlefield, to gain insights into how the U.S. government is working, and more. Classified information and sensitive information should stay in secure places.
One of the things I've been wondering about is how many other Signal chats were there possibly? I mean, this one was the Houthi PC small group Signal chat. I can't imagine it was the first one. I'm sure you wonder about that.
No, it's definitely a question that has run through my head, and it just shows on if they were this sloppy on this issue, they're probably sloppy on other issues. And here's the thing. Signal, if you can read the Signal chat, then the Chinese and the Russians, who are most likely on your phones, can read it. This is something that when you get on the committee, they drill it into you. Everything that's on your phone is compromised. So when they have this kind of discussion, they're really putting the lives of our men and women in service in danger.
No question about it, which is why I think this brushing through of nobody was hurt this time, don't worry about it, is offensive to people serving our country in the military. One of the debates here, I don't think it's a debate, is this question of whether this information was classified. And there's I don't want to call it semantics, but the issue here is that this information was operational and put people at risk, and it put an operation at risk. How did you read it, and how should you've seen a lot of classified information, digested it? What do you think?
Sure. Never have I ever seen an operational plan that was not classified. So this doesn't have to be a guessing game, though. What Secretary Hegseth was messaging about, the timing of the strikes, the weapons being used, that was all derived from an operational plan, probably drafted by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that got an original classification. In this situation, what would be prudent would be for there to be an investigation into what the original classification of that content was, that Secretary Hegseth then ostensibly copied into the Signal chat. What we haven't seen is the FBI, for example, announcing such an investigation, or the Pentagon proactively saying we're going to look into this. We should take the guessing out of this and let professionals do their jobs to determine if there was, in fact, an unauthorized disclosure of classified information, so we can avoid any unintended consequences.
One of the questions I often get when people stop me in the grocery store, I'm sure you all get the same things. It's like, what can Congress do? What can people do? I mean, you're in the minority in the House. The Democrats are in the minority in the Senate. There's certainly public opinion, and public opinion is not excited. They are very displeased by this, to put it diplomatically. What can Congress do to compel an investigation? What can you do in the minority, I should say, to compel an investigation, to push for more information if there isn't cooperation from Mike Johnson and the leadership in the House?
Yeah, we have to keep pushing and then discussing this in public. Today, one of the guys from Barstool Sports said, hey, this doesn't jive. This doesn't work.
It's a sign it's broken through, perhaps. Yes.
It's a sign that's broken through to the people that they care about. And we got to keep raising that as an issue, because this is not about scoring political points. This is about the safety of our armed services and how sloppy this administration has become. Remember, this is not the first lap of judgment that this administration has had when it comes to the CIA, DOJ, and OPM. This is a reoccurring thing that we're seeing. So I think that we got to keep talking about it, and then hopefully the tide turns and the senators stand up.
Joining us now, Michael Carpenter. He's former National Security Council Senior Director for Europe. Michael, it's great seeing you. So both Ukraine and Russia are making accusations today about the ceasefire and that the other side broke that ceasefire. Is there a possibility that this could end up being an agreement that could hold?
Well, let's break that down. I think it's a positive step to have the two sides agree to a moratorium on strikes on energy infrastructure. That has obviously been crippling for Ukraine, especially last winter and the winter before, where there were so many strikes on their power plants across the country, literally plunging large parts of the population into cold and darkness in the middle of winter. So this is a positive development if it holds, and that's a key question, whether it'll hold. And then on the Black Sea side, remember, we did have an agreement that was brokered by Turkey and the UN over a year ago to allow for freedom of navigation for ships in the Black Sea, this critical being an economic lifeline for Ukraine. So this would be positive if this agreement were to hold as well. However, this is exactly why President Zelensky had the arguments that he did in the Oval Office about security guarantees and about Russia not being a trustworthy partner, because this war in some shape or form has been going on since 2014, and there have been any number, dozens of ceasefires that the Russian side has violated. And so it would not surprise me at all if they agreed to something and then that was immediately violated by the Russian side.
Yeah, and I mean, and it was a unique perspective to create a U.S.-Ukrainian joint venture, which would have American presence, at least, energetic or rare minerals exploitation, American presence in Ukraine. Barring that, Michael, what are some of the guarantees and the conditions that you think could be acceptable to both sides?
So this is the thing. I am very skeptical that the fundamentals allow for Russia and Ukraine to reach agreement on a lasting ceasefire. I think they can do tactical agreements, 30-day ceasefires, a moratorium on strikes on energy infrastructure, but the larger deal is not going to come together because President Putin fundamentally has not shifted his maximalist aims in Ukraine one iota since the beginning of this war. He wants Ukraine to cede 5 Ukrainian regions. That would be like the United States ceding to an invading force 5 of our states to that invading country. And then he also wants Ukraine to pledge not to join NATO. And he wants an assurance that there will never be NATO country troops in Ukraine and a cap on the Ukrainian military. None of that will be acceptable to President Zelensky because he will rightly see that as capitulation.
The Atlantic today revealing the attack plans that were shared by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in a group chat that included the Vice President, the Secretary of State, the Director of National Intelligence, and notably, reporter Jeffrey Goldberg. The morning of March 15th, Hegseth texted this to the group. It contains specific details, the timing of when fighter jets and drones and missiles would be launched, ending with the message, "We are currently clean on OPSEC," meaning that no information has been released that could put the mission in danger. And Godspeed to our warriors. The Atlantic released that message and other texts because the Trump administration has been claiming that this information is not classified, that Hegseth did not reveal anything that could have endangered the mission. Now, take a listen to Senator Mark Warner, the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, reacting to these texts on Morning Joe.
When I read each item, let us know if you believe that would be classified or not. First, 11:44 a.m. Eastern that time. Weather is favorable. Just confirmed with CENTCOM we are a go for mission launch.
Classified.
Okay, next, 12:15 Eastern, F-18s launch, declaring this first strike package.
Obviously classified. If the bad guys knew, that would be harmful to the mission.
Okay, keep going. 1345, trigger-based F-18 first strike window starts. Target terrorist is at his known location, so should be on time, all caps. Also, strike drones launch MQ-9s.
Anybody who didn't realize or wouldn't put classified, if this was a test, you'd get a failing grade and you would not be admitted into, the intelligence community or the military.
A failure indeed. Now the Trump administration is moving the goalposts as fast as they possibly can. Mike Walls tweeting, no locations, no sources and methods, no war plans. Foreign partners had already been notified that strikes were imminent. Bottom line, President Trump is protecting America and our interests. It's an echo of what Hegseth has been saying, that there were no war plans shared. But experts tell NBC News that the idea that these were not war plans is a distinction without a difference. They are attack plans that contain timing and important details. Here's what Jeffrey Goldberg said about it on Morning Joe.
I don't know. I mean, Joe, if you and me and Mika and Jonathan were launching our Air Force to bomb some other show, maybe it's not a war. Maybe it's just a kinetic action. Maybe it's just an attack plan. Or the semantics here are ridiculous. Yeah. Just absolutely ridiculous. They're putting anybody with common sense can understand that is highly sensitive information, especially before an attack. So they can play a semantic game, but it's just silly. It's not. You know what it is? It's not serious. It's like, this is national security in the United States. The Houthis are a terrible group of terrorists. Like you have to be serious about confronting these challenges to the security of the United States. This is not, the administration right now is not engaged in a particularly serious conversation around this.
Goldberg also saying it was a level of detail that went above and beyond what other cabinet officials need to know, which is why its disclosure on a popular messaging app that Russians have been trying to break into is so very dangerous. But for Donald Trump, no big deal. Take a listen.
There were details, and there was nothing in there that compromised, and it had no impact on the attack, which was very successful.
Fact check. There were details. A lot of them, the type of fighter jets used, the kind of drones. And Hegseth even said that there would be more attacks. He texted the group, CENTCOM is on point. Great job, all. More strikes ongoing for hours tonight. And that is where we begin with Washington Post national investigative correspondent Kara Lennig, plus MSNBC political analyst and host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller. And with me at the table, host of the Independent Americans podcast and founder and CEO of Independent Veterans of America, Paul Rieckhoff. Carol, let's start with you. The Atlantic today releasing the attacks show pretty specific details on the airstrikes on the Houthis. What are the operational risks of having stuff like this on Signal?
Let me count the ways. It's just still, 48 hours in, 36 hours in, still, I can't believe I'm going to say this, Alicia, I'm speechless still. And that is a big thing for me. So here are the operational problems. One, who on that chat shouldn't be there? Jeff Goldberg. Mm-hmm. What if it had been somebody else? What if it had been some random person who wasn't actually knowledgeable about national security and not concerned about whether or not to keep this close and protected? What about the fact that the phones of all of the individuals, the cabinet members, the vice president, the national security advisor, they are targets for foreign hacking? Why are they not concerned about using this app to discuss something so operational? Third, foreign entities want to see us fail, and whether or not they care about the Houthis or the Houthis being blown out of oblivion, doesn't matter. They want to see us fail. So this information would be valuable and useful to them, whether they interfere with it or not. And then you have to think about the lives of the fighter pilots and others who are involved in this engagement, right? They're in danger when Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, says more flights and packages coming tonight, more firing, more events, more operations tonight. That basically puts all of those people at risk. There's a whole nother layer to this, Alicia, and that is this Signal chat, while being obviously poorly arranged on an app where it never should have happened, also was set to disappear in 1 week. And now we have a lawsuit from a nonprofit advocacy group, which is making the point that I've been making for the last several television interviews, which is these records were going to disappear, and they're part of our government's history, and they, by law, have to be preserved. So it's really sort of, I can't think of how many other ways this could have gone wrong, but we've got, what, 7 or 8 right now.
Well, and in addition to that, Paul, you have this administration just moving the goalposts in their explanation and qualifications of what it was that happened. I want you to listen to what Tulsi Gabbard said today.
What occurred in that Signal chat was an update to national security cabinet members that was also issued around the same time as updates to our foreign partners and allies in the region. There were no sources, methods, locations, or names of targets that were included in that chat. The decision to conduct this operation had been made long before that conversation took place. I do take my responsibility very seriously and played an integral role in providing the intelligence community's assessments that led to the ultimate decision by the president to conduct an operation, which, by the way, was very successful and continues to be very successful.
First, I don't want to get into specifics. Then there's no classified information, and now there's this.
It's bad, bad, bad. And the harder they spin, the worse it is. And they know how bad it is. You can see it in their faces. You can hear it in their tone. You can see how they're rattled when they're asked questions by the reporters. Because everybody down to the lowest private in the military knows this is wrong. The question to ask is not the classification, was it an attack plan? Did you violate operational security? Did you disclose anything that could have potentially harmed anyone? And if you did, you're wrong. And they're all wrong just for being on the chat to begin with. Right. Right? So that they're exposing the information, they're exposing themselves, they're exposing each other. So it's exposure all around. And they just keep digging deeper. But I think it's really important to know that they have to set the standard for the entire military. Yes. And if the lowest level of private did this in my infantry unit, they would be removed from the unit, they'd be tried by the UCMJ, and they'd probably be in jail. So why is the Secretary of Defense above that standard? He should not be. That's why he's got to resign or he's got to be fired. And they may all need to resign or be fired. We'll see how far this goes. But just by being there, they are wrong.
Right. And to the contrary, Tim, instead of seeing that level of accountability, what we're seeing is a hot potato that is getting tossed left and right. Here's what Marco Rubio had to say just today.
I've been assured by the Pentagon and everyone involved that none of the information that was on there, though not intended to be divulged, obviously that was a mistake and that shouldn't have happened, and the White House is looking at it, but that none of the information on there at any point threatened the operation or the lives of our servicemen.
Don't look at me. I was just on the chat. I was just participating in the chat. I was just a bystander. This has nothing to do with me. Ask the Pentagon. I mean, just the fact that no one is saying the buck stops with me. I will take responsibility. I will take accountability. That is part of the tell. And yes, this is about Pete Hegseth. Yes, this is about Marco Rubio. This is about Walz. But this is about Donald Trump. This is about the fact that Donald Trump is the commander-in-chief, and he's the one who gets to say the buck stops with me instead of he's saying it's not a big deal, Tim.
Yeah, I think it's pretty noteworthy that there's a lot of pushing over to Hegseth. I think Marco was not exactly subtle about that in his comments. Obviously, look, this is always Trump. The buck never stops with Trump. Anytime that there's bad news, and we've seen some reports from your colleague Jonathan Lemire and others that Trump isn't liking the news coverage of this, and he never takes accountability when there's bad news. But I think it's interesting that the lower level people, have subtly kind of blame shifted over to Hegseth. And my view on this, I think the best way to just kind of understand how this would have happened, there's the natural kind of hypothetical. It's like, oh, imagine if Biden had done this. But I don't think that's the right hypothetical for this. The right hypothetical for this is, imagine if a mid-level captain or general, two-star, one of our warfighters that was part of the mission, had sent the same text that Pete Hegseth did, sent it to a journalist that was perceived as hostile to Donald Trump. And imagine if that warfighter was a woman or a person of color. What would Pete Hegseth be saying today? What would Marco Rubio be saying today? We all know they'd be saying that, this is why we had to get rid of the woke generals. That we need a court martial, we need an investigation. Why was this person communicating with a reporter, an enemy of the people, who is perceived to be anti-President Trump? We need accountability. There needs to be an investigation. Kash Patel would be opening an investigation today, or DOJ would be. We just all know that. We know what the playbook would be if this had been, somebody that they could scapegoat. But because they're all responsible, because Waltz and Rubio and Vance and Hegseth, are all part of this chat. There's no person to point the finger at, and that's why you get these kind of preposterous spin.